Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell had always been different from her peers. While most naval officers spent their early careers on ships or at naval bases, Sarah had taken an unconventional path that led her through intelligence operations, counterterrorism units, and classified missions that couldn't be discussed even among fellow officers. Her slight frame and quiet demeanor often led people to underestimate her, which had become both a blessing and a curse throughout her military career. The Norfolk Naval Base buzzed with activity that Tuesday morning as personnel prepared for the largest joint operations briefing of the year. Representatives from every branch of the military had gathered to discuss upcoming missions in the Mediterranean, and the command center was filled with some of the most decorated officers in the United States Armed Forces. Sarah entered the briefing room early, as was her habit, carrying a thick folder of intelligence reports that would prove crucial to the day's discussions. She chose a seat near the back of the room, preferring to observe rather than draw attention to herself. The irony wasn't lost on her that despite holding one of the highest security clearances in the building, most people in the room had no idea who she was or what she did. The compartmentalized nature of military intelligence meant that her work remained largely invisible, even to those who benefited from it daily. As officers began filing into the room, Sarah noticed the easy camaraderie between the various units. Navy pilots chatted with Marine Corps captains, while Army colonels shared stories with Air Force majors. The atmosphere was relaxed despite the serious nature of their gathering, and there was an unmistakable sense of mutual respect among these seasoned military professionals. Then the SEALs arrived. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez led a group of 4 Navy SEALs into the briefing room, their presence immediately commanding attention. Rodriguez was everything that came to mind when people pictured a Navy SEAL: tall, muscular, confident to the point of swagger, with eyes that had clearly seen combat. His team carried themselves with the particular brand of quiet arrogance that came from knowing they were among the elite of the elite. Rodriguez's gaze swept the room, cataloging faces and assessing potential threats out of pure habit. When his eyes landed on Sarah, sitting alone in the back row, he paused. She didn't fit the typical profile of the officers in the room. Most were older, male, and carried themselves with the bearing that came from years of command experience. Sarah, with her youthful appearance and lieutenant commander's insignia, seemed almost out of place among the heavy brass. What Rodriguez didn't know was that Sarah had been personally selected by Admiral Thompson, the Pacific Fleet commander, to attend this briefing. Her analysis of terrorist financing networks had prevented 3 major attacks in the past 18 months, and her insights would be crucial to understanding the intelligence landscape they were about to discuss. The folder in her hands contained information that could save lives, but to Rodriguez, she simply looked like another junior officer who might have wandered into the wrong meeting. The SEAL team took seats in the middle of the room, and Rodriguez couldn't resist making a comment. Military culture often involved good-natured ribbing between different specialties, and SEALs were particularly known for their confidence and occasional irreverence toward traditional military hierarchy. "Hey, Lieutenant Commander," Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "You sure you're in the right briefing? This is for operational commanders, not desk jockeys." A few chuckles rippled through the room from some of the younger officers, though many of the senior personnel remained silent. There was nothing particularly malicious about the comment. It was the kind of gentle hazing that was common in military settings, where proving yourself was part of the culture. Rodriguez genuinely believed he was engaging in harmless banter with a fellow officer. Sarah looked up from her folder, her expression remaining neutral. She had faced this kind of skepticism countless times throughout her career. Being a woman in military intelligence meant constantly proving that she belonged, that her contributions were valuable, and that her rank had been earned rather than given. She had long ago learned that the best response was often no response at all. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Chief," she replied calmly, her voice carrying just enough authority to remind him that she outranked him. Then she returned her attention to her documents, effectively ending the exchange. Rodriguez shrugged, seemingly unbothered by her response. From his perspective, he had made a casual comment to a junior officer who happened to hold a slightly higher rank due to her officer status versus his enlisted position. In the SEAL community, respect was earned through action and proven capability, not through the number of bars or oak leaves on a uniform. What neither Rodriguez nor most of the other officers in the room realized was that Sarah's presence at this briefing was no accident. 3 months earlier, she had identified a pattern in financial transactions that suggested a coordinated terrorist operation targeting American naval assets in the Mediterranean. Her investigation had uncovered a network of shell companies, cryptocurrency transfers, and human intelligence assets that painted a picture of an imminent threat. The intelligence she had gathered was so sensitive that only a handful of people in the entire Department of Defense knew the full scope of what she had discovered. Admiral Thompson had personally requested her attendance at this briefing because her insights would be essential to the operational planning that was about to take place. As more officers entered the room, Sarah noticed several admirals taking their seats at the front of the briefing area. Admiral Thompson was there, along with Admiral Chen from Naval Intelligence, Admiral Williams from the Atlantic Fleet, and Admiral Martinez from Special Operations Command. These were not men who attended routine briefings. Their presence indicated the critical importance of whatever was about to be discussed. The room gradually filled with what amounted to a who's who of American naval leadership. Captains who commanded aircraft carriers sat next to colonels who led special operations units. The collective experience and authority represented in that room was staggering, yet most of these decorated officers had no idea that some of the most crucial intelligence they were about to receive had come from the quiet lieutenant commander sitting in the back row. Rodriguez and his team continued their casual conversations, occasionally glancing back at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and mild amusement. To them, she represented the administrative side of the military, necessary perhaps, but far removed from the real action that took place in the field. They had no way of knowing that her work had directly contributed to the success of several operations they had participated in over the past year. The irony of the situation was profound. Here was a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting the very people who were now questioning her presence, whose intelligence work had saved American lives on multiple occasions, being dismissed by those who had benefited most directly from her efforts. It was a perfect example of how the compartmentalized nature of military operations could create situations where heroes remained anonymous even to their colleagues. As the briefing time approached, Sarah reviewed her notes one final time. She knew that once Admiral Thompson called the meeting to order, the casual atmosphere in the room would shift dramatically. The information she was about to present would change how everyone in the room viewed the current threat environment, and the operations that resulted from this briefing would likely define the next phase of American naval strategy in the region. The stage was set for a moment that would challenge everyone's assumptions about rank, respect, and recognition in the modern military. Admiral Thompson entered the command center with the bearing of a man who had spent 4 decades in service to his country. At 62, he commanded respect not just through his rank, but through a reputation built on sound judgment and an unwavering commitment to the safety of American forces. His weathered face bore the lines of countless difficult decisions, and his presence immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room from casual to professional. "Attention on deck," someone called out, and the room snapped to attention as Admiral Thompson made his way to the front of the briefing area. The casual conversations ceased immediately, replaced by the focused silence of military professionals preparing to receive critical information. "At ease, everyone. Please take your seats," Admiral Thompson commanded, his voice carrying easily through the room. "What we're about to discuss today has the highest level of classification, and the operations we plan here will have direct implications for national security. Rodriguez and his fellow SEALs exchanged glances, their interest clearly piqued. This was exactly the kind of high-stakes briefing they lived for, the type that led to real missions with real consequences. Sarah remained in her seat, her folder now open as she prepared to present information that would reshape everyone's understanding of the current threat landscape. Admiral Thompson gestured toward the large display screens at the front of the room. 3 months ago, our intelligence community identified what appeared to be routine financial transactions between several European banks and Middle Eastern shell companies. What seemed like ordinary business dealings turned out to be something far more sinister. The screens lit up with a complex web of financial connections, shipping routes, and communication intercepts. The sheer scope of the network was impressive, and murmurs of appreciation for the analytical work rippled through the room. The person responsible for uncovering this network and mapping its full extent is here with us today, Admiral Thompson continued. Her work has been extraordinary, and frankly, it may have prevented the largest coordinated attack on American naval forces since World War II. Rodriguez leaned forward, suddenly very interested in learning who had produced this level of intelligence work. He scanned the front of the room, expecting Admiral Thompson to introduce one of the senior intelligence officers seated near the podium. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, would you please join me at the front?" The room fell completely silent as Sarah rose from her seat in the back row. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he realized that the officer he had casually dismissed moments earlier was the architect of what appeared to be one of the most significant intelligence discoveries in recent memory. Every eye in the room followed Sarah as she walked calmly to the front, her folder in hand and her expression professional. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. This young officer had just been publicly recognized by one of the most senior admirals in the Navy for work that clearly had life-or-death implications. "Gentlemen," Admiral Thompson said, his voice carrying a note of pride, "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has spent the past 6 months tracking a terrorist financing operation that was planning to simultaneously target 3 of our carrier groups in the Mediterranean." Her analysis identified not just the financial networks, but the operational timeline, key personnel, and intended targets. Sarah stepped up to the podium, and Admiral Thompson handed her the presentation remote. As she began to speak, her voice was clear and confident, betraying no nervousness despite the audience of senior officers hanging on her every word. "The network we identified consists of 12 primary shell companies operating across 7 countries," she began, clicking to the first slide. "Through cryptocurrency transactions, precious metals trading, and traditional banking relationships, they had assembled a war chest of approximately $47 million specifically earmarked for maritime operations." Rodriguez found himself leaning forward, genuinely impressed by the scope and sophistication of the intelligence work being presented. This wasn't desk work. This was the kind of analytical thinking that directly translated to saved lives and successful operations. Sarah continued her presentation, detailing how she had tracked communications between operatives, identified key logistics hubs, and ultimately discovered the planned timing of the attacks. Her work had involved coordination with intelligence agencies from multiple countries, financial institutions, and law enforcement organizations around the world. The attacks were scheduled to begin in 6 days, Sarah revealed, causing a stir throughout the room. 3 simultaneous operations targeting the USS Abraham Lincoln, USS George Washington, and USS Theodore Roosevelt. The goal was to create maximum casualties and demonstrate vulnerability in our fleet operations. Admiral Thompson stepped forward again. "Thanks to Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's work, we were able to prevent these attacks and roll up the entire network. 17 operatives have been arrested and the financial assets have been frozen. But more importantly, 3,000 American sailors are safe because of her dedication and expertise." The impact of this revelation was immediate and profound. Rodriguez felt a wave of shame wash over him as he realized how dramatically he had misjudged the situation. The officer he had casually teased about her rank had literally saved lives through her work, including possibly his own team's lives if they had been called to respond to such attacks. But Admiral Thompson wasn't finished. What makes Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's achievement even more remarkable is that this isn't her first success of this magnitude. Over the past 3 years, her intelligence work has contributed to the prevention of 14 separate terrorist operations, the successful completion of 37 special operations missions, and the protection of countless American lives. He paused, letting this information sink in. Her analysis has been briefed to the President, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and allied intelligence services around the world. The techniques she developed for tracking terrorist financing have been adopted as standard procedures across the intelligence community. Sarah concluded her presentation and stepped back, allowing Admiral Thompson to retake the podium. The room remained silent, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a routine briefing with casual military banter had become a sobering reminder of the dedication and sacrifice that often went unrecognized in military service. Rodriguez felt the weight of his earlier comment like a physical presence. He had made assumptions based on appearances and conventional thinking, failing to recognize that the most important work often happened behind the scenes, conducted by people who preferred to remain invisible rather than seek recognition. Admiral Thompson addressed the room again. The operations we'll be discussing today are built on the foundation of Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's intelligence work. The tactical plans, target priorities, and operational security measures all stem from her analysis. Every person in this room owes her a debt of gratitude. As Sarah returned to her seat, Rodriguez caught her eye. He wanted to apologize immediately, but something in her expression told him that she understood his earlier comment for what it was, a mistake born of ignorance rather than malice. She had clearly faced such situations before and had developed the grace to handle them professionally. The briefing continued with detailed operational plans based on Sarah's intelligence, but Rodriguez found it difficult to concentrate. He kept thinking about the assumptions he had made and the lessons he needed to learn. His SEAL training had taught him to assess situations quickly and accurately, but today he had failed that basic test in a spectacular way. Admiral Chen from Naval Intelligence took the podium next, further emphasizing the significance of Sarah's work. The network Lieutenant Commander Mitchell uncovered represents a new evolution in terrorist capabilities, he explained. The level of coordination, funding, and operational sophistication we discovered has changed our understanding of the threats we face. As the briefing progressed, it became clear that Sarah's intelligence work had implications far beyond preventing the immediate attacks. Her analysis had revealed new patterns of terrorist financing, communication methods, and operational planning that would inform American counterterrorism efforts for years to come. The most striking aspect of the entire situation was Sarah's demeanor throughout the presentation and subsequent discussion. Despite receiving public recognition from some of the most senior military leaders in the country, she remained focused on the work rather than the praise. When asked questions about her methodology, she answered with technical precision. When complimented on her achievements, she redirected attention to the collaborative nature of intelligence work. Rodriguez realized that this was what true professionalism looked like: competence without ego, achievement without arrogance, and dedication to mission above personal recognition. It stood in stark contrast to the casual dismissiveness he had displayed earlier, and the lesson was not lost on him or anyone else in the room who had witnessed the exchange. As Admiral Thompson concluded the operational portion of the briefing, the atmosphere in the command center had transformed completely. What had begun as a routine gathering of military professionals had become something far more significant, a moment of recognition for extraordinary service that had saved lives and protected national security. The detailed mission plans had been distributed, timeline confirmed, and operational responsibilities assigned. Each unit represented in the room now understood their role in the complex operation that would neutralize the remaining elements of the terrorist network Sarah had uncovered. The SEALs would handle direct action components, while intelligence teams would monitor communications and track any remaining financial assets. Admiral Thompson looked around the room one final time before making his closing remarks. Before we adjourn, I want to ensure that everyone here understands the significance of what Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has accomplished. Her work represents the best of what our intelligence community can achieve when dedication meets expertise. He paused, his expression serious. Too often, we fail to recognize the contributions of those who work behind the scenes. Their victories don't happen on battlefields where heroism is visible. Instead, they prevent battles from happening in the first place. They save lives through analysis, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to protecting others. Rodriguez felt every word like a personal rebuke, though Admiral Thompson's comments were directed at the entire room. The SEAL chief had spent his entire career in environments where respect was earned through physical courage and battlefield performance. Today had forced him to confront a different type of courage, the dedication required to spend months tracking financial transactions, analyzing communication patterns, and building cases that would never receive public recognition. Admiral Thompson continued, "The intelligence community often doesn't receive the recognition it deserves because success is measured in attacks that don't happen, lives that aren't lost, and operations that proceed without incident. We gather here today because Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's work allowed us to identify and neutralize a threat before it could harm a single American sailor." The Admiral then did something unexpected. Rather than simply dismissing the group, he remained standing at the podium and addressed the room with the tone of someone about to make an important announcement. "In recognition of Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's exceptional service and the lives saved through her intelligence work, I am recommending her for immediate promotion to Commander and for the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. Furthermore, her analytical methods will be incorporated into the curriculum at the Naval War College, ensuring that future intelligence officers can learn from her innovations." The announcement sent a wave of approval through the room. Several officers nodded in agreement, clearly feeling that such recognition was long overdue. Sarah herself seemed genuinely surprised by the announcement, though she maintained her professional composure. But Admiral Thompson wasn't finished. In a gesture that caught everyone off guard, including Sarah, he stepped away from the podium and came to attention facing her direction. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying formal military bearing, "would you please stand?" Sarah rose from her chair, uncertainty flickering across her face for the first time during the entire briefing. Admiral Thompson continued at attention, his posture ramrod straight in a formal position of respect. Then, in a moment that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their careers, Admiral Thompson rendered a crisp military salute to Sarah. The gesture was entirely unprecedented. Admirals didn't typically salute junior officers, regardless of their achievements. The effect was immediate and profound. Admiral Chen rose from his chair and came to attention, adding his salute to Admiral Thompson's. Within seconds, Admiral Williams and Admiral Martinez had joined them, 4 of the most senior naval officers in the room standing at attention and saluting a lieutenant commander. The symbolic power of the moment was overwhelming. These admirals, with their combined centuries of military experience and leadership, were acknowledging not just Sarah's specific achievements, but the broader principle that true military excellence comes in many forms and deserves recognition regardless of rank or visibility. One by one, every officer in the room rose to their feet. Captains who commanded aircraft carriers, colonels who led special operations units, and senior staff officers all came to attention and rendered salutes. The command center fell completely silent, except for the sound of chairs being pushed back and feet coming together at attention. Rodriguez felt his chest tighten as he stood with his fellow SEALs. The magnitude of his earlier comment weighed heavily on him as he rendered his own salute, understanding now that he was honoring someone whose contributions to military success far exceeded his own, despite his years of combat experience. The salute lasted for a full 30 seconds, an eternity in military time, before Admiral Thompson finally dropped his hand and called for the room to be at ease. As officers began to take their seats again, the atmosphere had shifted once more. This wasn't just respect for Sarah personally. It was recognition of a principle that military excellence takes many forms and often goes unrecognized. As the formal briefing concluded and officers began to file out of the room, Rodriguez approached Sarah. His SEAL training had taught him to take responsibility for his actions and learn from his mistakes, and this was clearly a moment that required both. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," he said, his voice lacking any of the casual confidence from earlier. "I owe you an apology. My comment earlier was inappropriate and based on assumptions I had no right to make." Sarah looked at him with an expression that held no anger or resentment. "Chief Rodriguez, I appreciate that, but it's not necessary. I've been in situations like this before, and I understand how easy it is to make judgments based on limited information." Her gracious response only made Rodriguez feel worse about his behavior, but also highlighted another aspect of her professionalism. Even in accepting his apology, she was teaching him something about leadership and character. "What you've accomplished," Rodriguez continued, "tracking down that network and preventing those attacks, that's the kind of work that saves lives. My team has probably benefited from intelligence you've provided without ever knowing it." Sarah smiled slightly, the first time her professional demeanor had relaxed throughout the entire morning. "That's how it's supposed to work, Chief. The best intelligence work is invisible when it's successful." As other officers approached to congratulate Sarah and discuss operational details, Rodriguez rejoined his SEAL team. His fellow team members had witnessed the entire exchange, and their respect for their chief had actually grown through watching him acknowledge his mistake and learn from it. The briefing had ended, but its impact would continue for months and years to come. The operational plans developed that day would successfully neutralize the remaining terrorist network elements. Sarah's promotion would be approved within weeks, along with her medal recommendation. Her analytical methods would indeed be incorporated into military intelligence training programs. More importantly, everyone who had been present in that command center carried with them a new understanding of military service and respect. The image of 4 admirals saluting a lieutenant commander would serve as a powerful reminder that rank and recognition don't always align with contribution and sacrifice. Rodriguez returned to his unit with a story he would tell for the rest of his military career, though never in a way that made himself the hero. Instead, it became his go-to example of how assumptions could blind people to excellence, and how true leadership meant recognizing and acknowledging merit, regardless of its source. The command center emptied gradually as officers departed to implement the plans that had been developed. Sarah remained behind to coordinate additional intelligence requirements with Admiral Thompson's staff, her work continuing even as others moved on to execution phases. As she gathered her materials and prepared to return to her own duties, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. The recognition had been meaningful, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that her work had succeeded in its primary goal, protecting American lives and maintaining national security. The salute from the admirals had been unprecedented and moving, but the prevented attacks represented the true measure of success. The story would eventually make its way through military circles, though always with respect for the classified nature of Sarah's specific work. It became a powerful reminder that military service takes many forms, that heroism often happens in quiet rooms rather than on dramatic battlefields, and that the greatest victories are sometimes the disasters that never occur because someone was dedicated enough to prevent them from happening in the first place.